Alright, good afternoon. Today I'm going to be continuing with our analysis of Act 3, Scene 3, in which Iago is manipulating Othello into believing that Desdemona has been having an affair with Cassio. I just want to touch on these lines here in which Othello discusses his own shortcomings and says that they will not serve as evidence of Desdemona's unfaithfulness. He says, "Nor from mine own weak merits will I draw the smallest fear or doubt of her revolt, for she had eyes and chose me." Now, we mentioned that this word revolt is interesting because it echoes Act 1, Scene 1, in which Roderigo discusses Desdemona's gross revolt against her father Brabantio's authority by marrying Othello in secret. Here, this word is again being used to discuss Desdemona's apparent deceit, but in this context, Othello is using it to refer to the possibility of her adultery. He says, "For she had eyes and chose me." Now, this is interesting for several reasons. Initially, we read that and we understand that he means that Desdemona knew who she was marrying when she married Othello. He says that she could not have gone into that marriage with any illusions about who he was. "For she had eyes and chose me" also implies a degree of Desdemona's control over her own behaviour. She chose me, implying her certainty. But also, "she had eyes and chose me" reminds us that Desdemona's choice seems unlikely in the eyes of a society that views Othello as hideous on account of his race. Remember that her father thought the only explanation for her marrying Othello was witchcraft. Here, Carol Phillips, the critic, suggests that this line reveals Othello's gross insecurity about himself. By acknowledging how he is perceived by others, Phillips suggests that Othello recognises his race and his appearance as possible barriers to love between himself and Desdemona, and that he isn't entirely confident in her love for him right from the start. He goes on, "No, Iago, I'll see before I doubt. When I doubt, prove, and on the proof there is no more but this, away at once with love or jealousy." So Othello speaking very decisively there. As soon as he has a doubt, he will seek proof. As soon as he has proof, either the jealousy will be dispensed with or he will fall out of love with Desdemona. Iago uses this as an opportunity to claim to open up more to Othello. "For now I shall have reason to show the love and duty that I bear you with franker spirit." So franker spirit suggests that he is about to become more open and honest with Othello, and as ever when we see words associated with honesty in connection with Iago, we understand that this is deeply ironic. He also claims that he will show Othello love and duty, and again both of these words are lies. We know that Iago hates Othello, and we also know that he bears no duty to Othello at all. Indeed, he's planning to betray him. Now, in this scene, we will continually see the way in which Shakespeare pits Desdemona's true love against Iago's false love. These two are presented as being in a sort of constant conflict. We know that Desdemona is innocent, is honest. We know that Iago is the opposite. And every time he speaks of his love for Othello, we know that this is false. So the question that we come to consider is, why does Othello trust Iago over Desdemona? And we're left with a couple of conclusions, none of which speak particularly highly to Othello. We'll talk about these as we go on. Iago says, "Therefore, as I am bound, receive it from me. I speak not yet of proof, although he'll offer up plenty of that in due course. Look at these imperatives. Look to your wife. Observe her well with Cassio." So he encourages Othello to watch Desdemona's behaviour around Cassio and to interpret it with a critical eye. "Wear your eyes thus, not jealous nor secure." So he apparently seems to be encouraging Othello to be objective in the way that he views this behaviour, but by discussing his doubts, by Iago discussing his doubts about both Desdemona and Cassio, we'll see that he's really influencing Othello's perspective here. "I would not have your free and noble nature, out of self-bounty, be abused. Look to it. I know our country disposition well. In Venice they do let God see the pranks they dare not show their husbands." So here Othello's virtues are referred to, free and noble nature. And these are exactly the virtues that Iago is seeking to exploit. The fact that Othello is trusting is seen by Iago as a weakness. And here he's saying that other people might exploit that weakness. We know really he is speaking about himself. Now, he also positions himself as an expert of kinds in Venetian society and Venetian ways. Remember, Othello is not from Venice, Iago is. So he suggests that he has sort of insider knowledge and that he might have a better understanding of Venetian women than Othello does. So he positions himself, as an expert, and he suggests here that Venetian women are inherently adulterous and dishonest. They do let God see the pranks they dare not show their husbands. Their best conscience, he says, is not to leave it undone, but to keep it unknown. So he suggests that Venetian women are essentially dishonest, adulterous, and deceitful. And he is about to suggest that Desdemona, simply by being a Venetian woman, fits the same characteristics. "Dost thou say so?" says Othello, and we see that already he is starting to believe Iago's lies and trust him as a source of this inside information. Iago offers this as supporting evidence. "She did deceive her father, marrying you," and again this refers back to the gross revolt that Roderigo speaks of in Act 1, Scene 1. "And when she seemed to shake and fear your looks, she loved them most." So he uses the fact that Desdemona was able to deceive Brabantio as evidence that Desdemona may be able to deceive Othello as well. And remember Brabantio's final words to Othello: "Look to her more as if thou hast eyes to see, she has deceived her father and may thee." So Desdemona is presented by her father as being potentially deceitful. Now at that point, back in Act 1, Othello responds, "My life upon her faith." But now he is starting to have doubts. He responds to Iago, "And so she did." So he listens to Iago carefully. Later we will see that he fails to give Desdemona the same fair hearing. "Why, go to then," says Iago, "she that so young could give out such a seeming, to seal her father's eyes up close as oak." So Iago is identifying this as proof of Desdemona's deceitful ways, even at such a young age. He thought 'twas witchcraft, but I am much to blame. I humbly do beseech you of your pardon for too much loving you. So Iago pretends to stop here out of concern for how he is upsetting Othello. But Othello responds, "I am bound to thee forever." So he professes his debt to Iago. We can tell that he's listening to him. He's deeply, deeply considering his words. And here suggests that he is going to be eternally grateful to Iago for revealing this, or for opening his eyes to this possibility. Now, this is going to come across as, by the end of the play, we're going to look back on this line as deeply, deeply tragic, because actually, rather than being indebted to Iago forever, Othello is going to forever regret, or as soon as he discovers the truth of Iago's lies, he will only regret ever having listened to him. Iago says, "I see that this hath a little dashed your spirits, Othello, not a jot, not a jot. In faith, I fear it has." So we can see already that Iago's poison is working its way through Othello. It's already upsetting him, it's already distressing him. And Othello claims that he isn't bothered by this, he isn't too troubled, but we will see as this scene progresses the level of deep distress that he's been provoked to by Iago. "I hope you will consider what is spoke comes from my love," says Iago. So he claims that he's only told Othello these things out of a sense of loyalty and devotion to him. "But I do see you're moved." So Othello is moved, he is upset by Iago's words, that poison's beginning to take effect. "I am to pray you not to strain my speech to grosser issues nor to larger reach than to suspicion." So Iago begs and pleads with Othello, "Please don't ask me to say any more than I already have." And Othello says, "I will not." "Should you do so, my lord, my speech should fall into such vile success as my thoughts aimed not at." So Iago continually implies that there are more horrors in his mind, more thoughts that he has, more suspicions waiting to be discovered, waiting to be discussed that he dares not speak of. And all of this is going to serve to provoke Othello's curiosity, to upset and distress him as he considers the fact that already the unpleasant things that he has discussed with Iago, that isn't everything, okay? "Cassio is my worthy friend, And then he breaks off in mid-sentence and says, "My lord, I see you're moved." And look at that repetition here and here. So Iago continues to speak and then breaks off again to say, "But you look upset about this." Othello responds, "I do not think, but Desdemona's honest." Oh, no, not much moved. "I do not think, but Desdemona's honest." Now, look at the way that these lines, "My lord, I see you're moved." No, not much moved. One follows directly on from the other. They finish each other's lines, and this illustrates the closer bond between the two of them that Shakespeare is establishing within this scene. Okay, again, just another little touch of AO5 here. "I do not think, but Desdemona's honest," says Othello. And then, "Long live she so, and long live you to think so," says Iago. And Othello goes, "And yet how nature erring from itself." Now, again, Carol Phillips suggests that the fatal mistake that Othello makes is in coming to question his own judgment, that his worst mistake is in fact coming to doubt his own sense of what is happening around him and taking Iago's word instead of considering things for himself. Here we see how in one breath he professes his faith in Desdemona and then almost immediately afterwards comes to suspect her behaviour. He says, "How nature erring from itself." So her nature does seem somewhat contradictory. It's as though her behaviour is unnatural. Now, if he's coming to see his own marriage as unnatural, he is coming to take on Iago's view of things. Remember, this is exactly how Iago and Roderigo spoke about the marriage of Desdemona and Othello back in Act 1, as though it was in some way unnatural and abhorrent, and that Desdemona was going against her better nature in marrying Othello. So here, really we might argue that Othello is echoing Iago's speech and mimicking Iago's perspective of the world. Iago interrupts here. See this dash where Othello has broken off and Iago jumps in? "Aye, there's the point. Yes, now you come to mention it," as to be bold with you. So he suggests he's growing in confidence now in how he speaks to Othello. "Not to affect many proposed matches of her own clime, complexion, and degree, whereto we see in all things nature tends, for one may smell in such a will most rank, foul disproportion, thoughts unnatural. Oh, but pardon me, I do not in position distinctly speak of her." So here Iago lists off the ways in which Desdemona's behaviour could be interpreted as proof of unnatural thoughts and perhaps a sort of improper kind of behaviour. The fact in Iago's eyes, the very fact that Desdemona has chosen Othello may be interpreted as proof of her unnatural behaviour and her unnatural desires. And he suggests here that this could be seen as evidence that she could go ahead with something like an adulterous affair. And then he realises he's gone too far and says, "Oh, I'm not speaking just of Desdemona here, I'm not talking about her specifically." So actually, the fact that Desdemona chose to marry someone so distinctly different from her, the fact that her love transcends all social boundaries, we would look at that surely as evidence of her deep spiritual and emotional connection with Othello. But here it is inverted, and that good quality, that proof of Desdemona's love, now becomes evidence of her impropriety and thoughts unnatural. So look at the way in which, just as he promised he would, Iago turns Desdemona's virtue into pitch. He turns these good qualities, these beautiful aspects of her love for Othello, into something disturbing and unpleasant and unnatural and abhorrent. This is Iago's great skill. He goes on and says, "Her will, recoiling to her better judgment, may fall to match you with her country forms and happily repent." He suggests that perhaps Desdemona in time will come to compare Othello with her countrymen, with other Venetian noblemen, those wealthy curled darlings discussed in Act 1 that she rejected, and regret marrying Othello. Now, another little bit of AO5 just down here. Valerie Traub suggests that Othello is actually vulnerable because he internalises, he takes on board and comes to accept Iago's negative view of black men, and this undermines his sense of self. Here, when Iago is suggesting that Desdemona may come to regret marrying him, Othello is going to listen to Iago here because he's claimed to know their country so much better than Othello does, and wonder whether or not this is going to prove true. He also may look at Cassio, who has been described by Iago as the ideal man with whom a woman could have an affair, and question how he compares. Okay? Now, look at how this word will be echoed in the coming pages, coming minutes. Farewell, farewell. If more thou dost perceive, let me know more. Set on thy wife to observe, leave me, Iago. So Othello says, if you see anything more, you talk to me about it, let me know. Iago, leaving. My lord, I take my leave. And Othello speaks aloud his thoughts in just these couple of lines. Why did I marry? This honest creature, that's Iago, doubtless sees and knows more, much more than he unfolds. So he believes that Iago is wiser and more knowledgeable than he's letting on. He suspects that there is more in his thought. He may know more about Desdemona and Cassio than he wants to discuss. But look at how his doubts are also taking hold. Why did I marry? He questions himself immediately. Now, if you think back to how he has spoken of Desdemona in every previous scene, he speaks of her with absolute joy and reverence and delight. And now he is coming to question whether he made the right choice in marrying not just Desdemona, but marrying at all. As Iago returns almost immediately, he says, My lord, I would I might entreat your honour to scan this thing no farther. So Iago puts up this pretence now of asking Othello to stop thinking about this. We know, of course, that he plans to drive Othello mad by poisoning him with this jealousy. Leave it to time. Although 'tis fit that Cassio have his place, for sure he fills it up with great ability, yet, if you please to hold him off a while, you shall by that perceive him and his means. So Iago suggests, even though Cassio is fit to resume his position as lieutenant, he says wait a little longer, because you may be able to detect something about Desdemona and Cassio's relationship if you wait a little longer. Note if your lady strain his entertainment with any strong or vehement importunity, much will be seen in that. So look at how Iago is masterfully here orchestrating the conditions in which he will prove Desdemona's infidelity. He's saying, watch how Desdemona speaks about Cassio, and if she particularly begs you to put him back in his position, to reposition him as lieutenant, this will be evidence of her love for him. Now we know that Iago has already manipulated things so that Desdemona will plead for Cassio's reinstatement, Cassio will ask Desdemona to intervene on his behalf, and therefore Othello is going to find himself repeatedly asked by Desdemona when Cassio will have his position back. And every time that happens, bear in mind again that that's at Iago's urging, every time that happens, this is just going to seem like confirmation of Desdemona's infidelity. Fear not my government, says Othello, and Iago leaves again. And here, in this monologue, we see how distressed Othello is by everything that Iago has said. This fellow is of exceeding honesty and knows all qualities with a learned spirit of human dealings. So first of all, he again acknowledges that he perceives Iago as an honest man. Othello believes Iago in part because he comes to conform to Iago's characterization of himself as an outsider to Venetian society. So he comes to accept Iago's view of the world. He sees himself as an outsider, and he sees Iago as a learned Venetian, someone that's got a lot of experience in that society and therefore understands it better than he possibly could himself. He goes on now and uses an extended metaphor describing Desdemona in the terms of a trained hawk. If I do prove her haggard, he says, if she turns out to be wild, that is, if she turns out to be unfaithful, though her jesses were my dear heartstrings, I'd whistle her off and let her down the wind to prey at fortune. So jesses are the ties that secure the hawk's legs, the straps. And he says that these are like his heartstrings. So even though they are bound together in this way, he would let her go, he would release her to prey at fortune, to take her own chances and look after herself. That is, if she turns out to be unfaithful to him, he will end their relationship, no matter how much grief and suffering this would cause him. Because if her jesses are his heartstrings, that's going to cause incredible pain when they are separated. So he uses this extended metaphor to again establish his his sort of certainty either way. If he can prove that she's adulterous, then that's the end of their love, despite everything that's come beforehand. He then goes on to list some of the possible reasons in his mind that she may be unfaithful. Haply, meaning perhaps, for I am black, and have not those soft parts of conversation that chamberers have, or for I am declined into the vale of years, yet that's not much. She's gone, I am abused, and my relief must be to loathe her. So these are his reasons for, or the possible reasons that he considers Desdemona may be sleeping with Cassio. Now, having just previously said that he will not consider his weak merits as evidence of her cheating, he now starts to do exactly that. He questions the causes of her infidelity. And look at the fact that this ends with, she's gone, I am abused. The certainty that he speaks with there in those declarative statements reveal his kind of binary view of women. It's one thing or another. It's very black and white. Desdemona is either the loyal, faithful, submissive wife, or she is, to use a word that he will use very shortly, a whore. She is one or the other, and there is no possibility of any middle ground. This final line here as well, sorry, not final line, this line, my relief must be to loathe her. He anticipates the hatred that he must feel if he has been betrayed by Desdemona, and goes on to say, O curse of marriage, that we can call these delicate creatures ours and not their appetites. So he refers to marriage now as something like a curse, something dreadful, something that he has submitted to and now regrets. These delicate creatures, he is referring there to women. He says we can call women ours, and look at that possessive tone that he's striking, but not their appetites. Now, appetites are their desires. So he says he can control Desdemona to the extent that she is married to him, she's bound to him, but he can't control her sexual appetite. He can't control her lustful ways, which he seems now to accept as part of women. He seems to accept Iago's view of Venetian women as inherently lustful and adulterous. And in doing so, he adopts a misogynistic view that really is uncharacteristic of him. This is not the way that he's spoken of women before. It's certainly not the way that he has spoken of Desdemona, up until Iago's influence has taken over. And Iago's influence can be seen further in the animalistic language that Othello takes on here. I had rather be a toad and live upon the vapour of a dungeon than keep a corner in the thing I love for others' uses. So he would rather be a toad living in the sewers of a castle, or living in a dungeon, than have Desdemona used by others, as in for Desdemona to be having affairs. Yet he considers 'tis the plague of great ones, prerogatived as they are, less than the base. 'Tis destiny unshunnable, like death. Even then this forked plague is fated to us when we do quicken. Look where she comes. So he talks about being cuckolded as something fated and inescapable, as though this were something that destiny had planned out for him since birth, when we do quicken. Enter Desdemona and Emilia. And as soon as he sees Desdemona, Othello remembers his love for her and says, if she be false, oh, then heaven mocks itself. I'll not believe it. Now remember, in the Renaissance era, there seemed to be a connection between people's outward appearances and their moral character. So Othello finds it really hard to believe that someone so beautiful as Desdemona could possibly be deceitful and could possibly be adulterous. When he is with Desdemona, Othello doubts Iago's lies and comes to trust more in his own judgment. But as soon as he's on his own again, those doubts and those jealousies creep back in, leaving himself vulnerable to Iago's manipulation. So he says heaven mocks itself by the creation of something imperfect. If heaven has created something as beautiful as Desdemona, but she is false to him, if she is indeed deceitful, then something is fundamentally wrong. And indeed, something is fundamentally wrong. None of this is true. How now, my dear Othello, says Desdemona, your dinner and the generous islanders by you invited to attend your presence. So look at how she speaks to him, with the kindness, love and affection she always has. My dear Othello. Othello responds, I am to blame, and speaks softly. And we realise in that line, he considers himself as the reason for her infidelity. I am to blame. He sees it as some as something that has arisen from his weak merits, something he has failed to do. So there again, his sense of self has been undermined by Iago's negative view of black men and by his discussion of Venetian women. "Why do you speak so faintly?" Desdemona says, implying she hasn't heard him. "Are you not well?" Othello responds, "I have a pain upon my forehead here." So we see here the physical effects of the stress caused by Iago's lies. We see his distress is taking on a physical quality. And later in the play we'll see the sort of physical trauma that Othello undergoes as a result of Iago's poison. There's also the double meaning, perhaps. The idea that a cuckold had horns is something that you will see repeating in the literature, where his cuckold's horns would grow. So this forked plague that he refers to previously, this again is referring to the state of being cuckolded as though wearing horns. Here, where he talks about having a pain on his forehead, we might interpret that he is referring to the pain caused by being cuckolded, by being cheated on by Desdemona. "Faith, that's with watching. 'Twill away again." So Desdemona says, "Well, that's because you haven't slept. It will go. Let me but bind it hard. Within this hour it will be well." So look at her as caring and nurturing here. She is fulfilling her wifely duty, looking after her husband and hoping that he feels better soon. She offers to wrap his head with her handkerchief to try and soothe some of the pain. But Othello pushes the napkin away, her handkerchief that she offers, and says, "Your napkin is too little." Now, this handkerchief is later going to be seen as symbolic of love. We understand that it has a deeper significance for Othello and for Desdemona. But here when he says it is too little, we could therefore come to interpret that he is saying her love is not enough. "Let it alone," he says. "Come, I'll go in with you." "I'm very sorry that you're not well." Exeunt Othello and Desdemona. And who appears but Emilia, Iago's wife, who is happy to have discovered this handkerchief. She says, and explaining the sort of backstory and significance that this item has, this was her first remembrance from the Moor. So this was the first gift that Desdemona received from Othello. "My wayward husband hath 100 times wooed me to steal it, but she so loves the token, for he conjured her she should ever keep it, that she reserves it evermore about her to kiss and talk to. I'll have the work ta'en out and give it to Iago. What he will do with it, heaven knows, not I nothing but to please his fantasy." So, a couple of things to point out here. First of all, she refers to her husband Iago as wayward, suggesting she has some understanding of his untrustworthy character. Secondly, we see that this handkerchief really is proof of Desdemona's love for Othello, because she keeps it on her all the time, kissing it and talking to it, revealing how faithful she is, revealing how deeply she loves her husband. Furthermore, when Emilia says that she will take the handkerchief and give it to Iago because he's requested it 100 times that she could steal it, she says what he will do with it, heaven knows. So she has no idea why he might want it, but she says, "I nothing but to please his fantasy," revealing her submissive role in their relationship. Okay, I'm going to skip the detail here a little bit and just kind of give you an overview. The way that Iago speaks to Emilia here is really rude. He's very blunt when he speaks to Emilia. When she says, "I have a thing for you," meaning the handkerchief, she uses this sexual innuendo, thing meaning the female sexual organ. When Iago responds, "You have a thing for me, it is a common thing," he implies that his wife is promiscuous. And again, this speaks to Iago's naturally suspicious ways. It also reveals again his misogynistic view, and also his relationship with Emilia, which is shown here to be really quite a cruel and unhappy one. He goes on to call her a foolish wife, openly insulting her. But as soon as he realises that what she has is the handkerchief, look at how eager he is. He finishes her line. "For that same handkerchief," says Emilia. "What handkerchief?" Completing that line of iambic pentameter, that speech immediately following on after hers conveys that eagerness that he has to get hold of this handkerchief. Emilia goes on to explain that Desdemona let it drop by negligence, so she accidentally dropped it, and she has taken it in order to please him. Iago calls her a good wench, and again completing her line, revealing how eager he is to get hold of this and praising her. "A good wench," he says, "give it to me." and immediately follows this complementary phrase with an imperative, an order, an instruction. Emilia asks what he wants with it, and then seems to suggest that if he doesn't want it for anything important, she regrets giving it to him because Desdemona will miss it so much. Poor lady, she'll run mad when she shall lack it. So Iago is shown to snatch it from her, again revealing how eager he is to get hold of it. Just put a little more light on the page. But then he later says, be not agnoun on it. Agnoun, like acknowledged, pretend you don't know anything about it. I have use for it, he says, and then go, leave me. And again, those imperatives. He orders his wife away and she leaves without saying another word. We have again one of Iago's short soliloquies here, a few lines directed at the audience in which he explains what he's going to do with the handkerchief. He says, trifles light as air are to the jealous confirmations strong as proofs of Holy Writ. So, for jealous people to be convinced requires minimal evidence. And this also echoes that line from Act 2, Scene 1, line 164, where he says, with as little a web as this, I will ensnare as great a fly as Cassio. Here, he's saying only a tiny little bit of evidence is required to convince those that are already jealous. This may do something, he says. The more already changes with my poison, that is, his persuasion. Dangerous conceits are in their natures poisoned, which at the first are scarce found to distaste, but with a little act upon the blood, burn like the mines of sulphur. I did say so. So he seems to speak here from his own experience. I did say so. And we know how jealous Iago is already, how suspicious he is of his own wife's fidelity. So we see here, he talks about this napkin as being a trifle light as air, a flimsy thing, something insubstantial, barely proof of anything. But he says that for Othello, this will be like words from the Bible, proof of Holy Writ. So he's talking about how this will appear like concrete proof of Desdemona's infidelity. Jealousy here then, burning like the mines of sulphur, is presented as something tortuous, corrosive, hellish in the pain that it's going to cause. And we are going to see immediately the effects of Iago's words upon Othello's sanity. Enter Othello. Look where he comes, says Iago. Not poppy nor mandragora nor all the drowsy syrups of the world shall ever medicine thee to that sweet sleep which thou owedst yesterday. And Othello is shown to be muttering, ha, ha, false to me. So Iago talks about how not even opium or any kind of drug would give Othello the kind of sweet sleep that he had before Iago had suggested to him about Desdemona's adultery. So he suggests that Othello's peace of mind has been ruined here, and Othello is shown to be speaking in this fractured, fragmented way, indicating his distress, false to me, laughing to himself and discussing Desdemona's cuckolding of him. Why, how now, General? No more of that, says Iago, again feigning a desire to see Othello talk of something else. But Othello demands that he leave. Avaunt, be gone. Thou hast set me on the rack. So you've put me on a torture device here. Othello feels tortured by his jealousy, which is of course Iago's exact intention. He says, I swear 'tis better to be much abused than but to know it a little. And doesn't he just echo Iago here, earlier in Act 3, Scene 3, lines 169 to 170, when he talks about a cuckold living in bliss once he has proof that his partner has been unfaithful to him and can forget his love of them, but talking about the pain caused by uncertainty and doubt. How now, my lord, says Iago. And Othello goes on talking as if Desdemona's guilt was certain. He questions himself and dwells on what he perceives as his past ignorance of her adultery. What sense had I of her stolen hours of lust? He goes on in this vein for a while, imagining Cassio's kisses on her lips and saying he had no awareness of it. He then goes on to talk about having been robbed. He that is robbed, not wanting what is stolen, let him not know it, and he's not robbed at all. Now again, this echoes Act 1, Scene 1, in which Roderigo and Iago talk about Brabantio as having been robbed in Othello marrying Desdemona. Again, women are being discussed as possessions, as objects to be stolen. Remember that Iago promised in Act 2, Scene 2 to practice upon Othello's peace and quiet even to madness, and here's the proof of it. Othello is completely obsessed with the idea that Desdemona has been unfaithful to him, and he hasn't seen any proof or evidence yet. "I am sorry to hear this," says Iago. Again, we know he's not. Othello responds, "I had been happy if the general camp, pioners and all, so the lowest rank of soldiers, had tasted her sweet body, so I had nothing known." So he wishes he could revert to a state of ignorance. He says that he would have been happy if the whole camp had slept with Desdemona, as long as he'd known nothing about it. And again, in that phrase, tasted her sweet body, we have that language of consumption. So sort of the ideas of sex and jealousy both being presented as something that will eat one up. So look at the amount of times here that Othello says farewell. He talks about leaving behind any kind of military glory. Farewell the tranquil mind, farewell content, at the same time that he is leaving behind his sanity. So he sees grief as an inevitable future. He says goodbye to peace, contentment, quiet, happiness, but also goodbye to everything that's given him glory or purpose in his life before. So he sees this sort of, the total hopelessness of his situation now. Farewell, Othello's occupation is gone. Now, is it possible, my lord? Iago questions how quickly possibly his manipulation has taken effect. And Othello demands something of Iago now. "Villain, be thou sure thou prove my love a whore." Now, previously, he's called Desdemona my fair warrior, using language that suggests that their relationship subverts societal expectations of men and women. But now look at how Othello forces Desdemona to conform to one or the other of these two options. She is either innocent bride or she is whore. Look at that binary, that misogynistic viewpoint that he has of her now. So he commands Iago to provide some evidence. "Be sure of it," he says. "Give me the ocular proof, the visual evidence of her guilt. Or by the worth of mine eternal soul, thou hadst been better have been born a dog than answer my waked wrath." So he offers these threats of violence if Iago is found guilty. And Iago says, "Has it come to this?" So here and here we have Othello's threats against Iago if indeed he's turns out to be guilty or a liar, slandering Desdemona and torturing Othello. Now, there's dramatic irony here, because we know that this is the truth of the matter. Iago is slandering Desdemona and torturing Othello. That is his entire plan. But look at the way in which Othello's language here illustrates changes in his character as he makes that shift from romantic lover to jealous revenger. His violent words here illustrating the degradation, the lowering of his character. Look at the way he spoke back in Act 1 when he talks about his parts and his title and his perfect soul, or offers that incredibly beautiful romantic defence of his and Desdemona's love for one another. Look at what he's reduced to now. Okay. Iago responds, "O Grace, O heaven forgive me, are you a man, have you a soul or sense? God buy you, take mine office, O wretched fool that loves to make thine honesty a vice." So Iago feigns regret here, saying that his honesty has caused Othello's rage and threatening behaviour, and he pretends to regret having opened up to Othello in this way because Othello is now speaking to him so harshly as a result. But Othello responds, "Nay, stay, thou shouldst be honest." Iago says, "I should be wise, for honesty's a fool and loses that it works for." So Iago is saying I should never have been so honest because it's causing me to lose your respect because you're talking about me in such a wretched way for having revealed the truth about your wife and Cassio. We might look at that and think, is that actually a glimpse of Iago's true nature, that he thinks that honesty is foolish? "By the world," says Othello, "I think my wife be honest and think she is not. I think that thou art just, thou art truthful, and think thou art not." So look at how he's gripped by doubts and uncertainty, but ultimately his belief in Iago supersedes his belief in Desdemona. And that really reveals the influence of the patriarchal and misogynistic society that these characters inhabit, doesn't it? If a man's word is more valuable than what a man's wife's. He believes Iago over Desdemona in part because Iago is male, because he purports to have this insider knowledge about the true nature of women. Othello says again, I'll have some proof. He demands it. He goes on, her name that was as fresh as Diana's visage. Diana, the virgin goddess of classical mythology, was known for being pale. She's associated with the moon as well. So her name is now begrimed and black as mine own face. He talks about her reputation then having been tarnished and blackened. Important contextual point here. In the Renaissance era, a wife's chastity, her sexual fidelity, was a part of her husband's honour. So a man was seen to have been dishonoured if his wife were to be adulterous or overly sexual. So here we see that Desdemona's reputation takes on an even deeper significance, because if she's not faithful, that reflects badly on Othello as well. If there be cords or knives, poison or fire or suffocating streams, I'll not endure it. Would I were satisfied. So Othello is saying, and ultimately he could commit suicide to end the suffering that he feels as a result of his jealousy. And again, look at that violent language. Look how low he has been brought by Iago's lies. I see, sir, says Iago, you are eaten up with passion. And there's that language of consumption again. It's not passion that's eaten Othello up, it's jealousy. I do repent me that I put it to you. So he's saying he regrets having put Othello in this state. Of course, we know he doesn't. You would be satisfied. Would, says Othello. Nay, I will. So that shift there from the sort of this verb indicating possibility to one indicating certainty reveals Othello's desperation for some sort of truth or clarity. Iago asks what kind of proof Othello would want and uses this really crude sexual language. Would you, the supervisor, grossly gape on, behold her topped? So suggesting, would you see her being, would you see her sleeping with another man? And again, this crude sexual language that so distressed Desdemona's father is now making a return, this time to torment Othello. And he responds, death and damnation, oh! And this fragmented speech, again, evidence of the agony that he feels. Okay, so Iago asks what kind of proof Othello would be satisfied with, and again uses this animalistic and bestial language to describe Desdemona and Cassio as sort of animalistic in their sexual desires. Were they as prime as goats, as hot as monkeys, as salt as wolves in pride, and as fools, as gross as ignorance made drunk? He talks about, even if all of those things were the case, it's impossible that you would ever see them sleep together. But he offers imputation and strong circumstances as evidence instead. So he offers up circumstantial evidence. And here again are these trifles light as air about to make another appearance. Othello simply says, give me a living reason she's disloyal. Okay, again, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but in this speech here, and look at how Iago dominates on the page, just as an aside. A couple of lines here from Othello, and look at how Iago is starting to take a more dominant role, commanding through his use of language, as we've seen previously when he has manipulated Rodrigo and Cassio into doing what he sees fit. So we can see here Iago embarking on a long and completely fabricated anecdote in which he claims to have been sleeping next to Cassio in the barracks, and hearing Cassio talking about Desdemona in a romantic and in a sexual way. And again here, this is seen as proof that Cassio and Desdemona are engaged in an affair. Iago says, in sleep I heard him say, sweet Desdemona, let us be wary, let us hide our loves. So there's this idea, which we've seen again in other of Shakespeare's plays. You will have seen this perhaps in Macbeth, when Lady Macbeth speaks her guilt aloud while sleepwalking. Again here, there is this belief that whilst sleeping, one might reveal one's true thoughts or intentions. So Iago offers this totally false story as this circumstantial evidence to prove Desdemona and Cassio's guilt, and all of these in combination are enough proof for Othello to believe his story. Othello's response, "O monstrous, monstrous," and this again echoes the language that he used earlier when he says it is as if there were some monster in your thoughts, too hideous to be seen. And in Act 1, Scene 3, at the end of Iago's soliloquy, when he refers to this monstrous birth that he will bring to the world's light. Okay. Iago responds, oh no, this was just his dream. So Iago offers up this evidence and then seems to deny it in the same breath, forcing Othello to be the one to suggest that this is that this must all be true. This denoted a foregone conclusion, says Othello, so no, even if this was simply a dream, it indicates that they have previously slept together. Iago responds, this may help to thicken other proofs that do demonstrate thinly. So he admits that this evidence he's offered up is fairly meagre, there isn't a lot of it, but he says when taken together with other evidence, it may serve as proof. And Othello here offers this incredibly violent, ferocious line, I'll tear her all to pieces. And this is the first, most obvious, most overt threat of violence against Desdemona specifically. Look at that exclamative, look at this aggressive language which foreshadows future violence. The savagery of that line reveals how Othello has been brought low by Iago's lies. Okay. Iago offers now a little glimpse of hope, the hope that Desdemona may yet be redeemed. He says, she may be honest yet. And then he asks whether Desdemona has ever had this handkerchief that's dotted with strawberries. Now we know this is the love token that Emilia has stolen from Desdemona and given to Iago. And this handkerchief is going to turn from a symbol of Othello's love into a symbol of love's destruction. It's going to become the ocular proof that he demands as evidence of Desdemona's infidelity. Now, remember a little bit of context here. Handkerchiefs were signifiers of wealth and status in the Renaissance era in Europe. Possession of a lady's handkerchief, which was of course an intimate object, was seen as proof of adultery. So when Iago says, I know not that, but such a handkerchief, I'm sure it was your wife's, did I today see Cassio wipe his beard with? This is approaching that ocular proof that Othello had demanded. The fact that Cassio wiped his beard with it is a clear disrespectful gesture. And again, see Iago coming to dominate, taking control of this narrative here. Othello says, if it be that, and Iago interrupts, if it be that or any that was hers, it speaks against her with the other proofs. Now, these proofs that he's talking about, these are his other lies, his other stories. But again, he's offering up this sort of patchwork of different fragments of supposed evidence to prove Desdemona's guilt. Oh, that the slave had 40,000 lives, Othello says, speaking now of Cassio. One is too poor, too weak for my revenge. So he wishes he could kill Cassio more than once with this language that conveys the depth of his fury. He goes on, all my fond love, thus do I blow to heaven, 'tis gone. So he swears that he no longer loves Desdemona and instead summons up vengeance. Arise, black vengeance, from thy hollow cell. This hollow cell perhaps being his empty heart. So using these metaphors now. Yield up, O love, thy crown and hearted throne to tyrannous hate. So he says that hatred is now going to replace love in this hearted throne, in his heart. Swell bosom with thy fraught, for 'tis of aspics tongues. So he's now carrying this heavy burden, which is like poisonous snake stings. So this animalistic language again seems to mimic Iago's speech, and the irony here of Othello talking about poisonous serpents, when in fact Iago is that serpent, he is that devilish character that has poisoned Othello against his wife. He kneels. Iago says, yet be content. Othello speaks again in exclamatives, again in fragments. Oh, blood, blood, blood. And again that fragmented speech, that repetition conveying his rage, his desire for revenge. Look at the frantic pace of this scene as well. This supports Iagos' plan, doesn't it? Iago had said at the end of Act 2, dull not device by coldness and delay. So part of Iagos' plan is the speed at which it unfolds, and it must unfold at that speed or else it would not be believable. Patience, I say, says Iago. Your mind perhaps may change, but Othello says never. and he is now hell-bent on revenge, not only on Cassio but on Desdemona too. And he compares this hatred that he feels, his bloody thoughts, to the Pontic Sea, the Black Sea, whose icy current and compulsive course ne'er feels retiring ebb but keeps due on. So he uses again an extended metaphor, conveying this desire he has for revenge as heartless and inevitable, and this befits Othello's status as a tragic play. It is moving now inexorably to that tragic and bloody conclusion. Okay, almost at the end of this act and scene now. We're on to the final page. So he says, shall ne'er look back, ne'er ebb to humble love. So he suggests there is no way back for him now. He is set upon this course of revenge. He has received enough proof at this stage. He says, now beyond marble heaven, in the due reverence of a sacred vow, I here engage my words. So again, he uses this religious language. This almost echoes a marriage vow. He and Iago are bound. Inverting this vow of love, making it a promise to enact acts of hatred and violence. Iago kneels next to Othello, again developing this sense of this close bond forming between them. And Iago pledges his loyalty to Othello in lines that we know are utterly dishonest. Witness, he says, you ever-burning lights above, you elements that clip us round about. Witness here that Iago doth give up to the execution of his wit, hands, heart, to wronged Othello's service. So he makes this promise of loyalty, and he invites the elements, he invites all the stars that are above them to witness his promise of loyalty to Othello. Let him command, Iago says, and to obey shall be in me remorse, what bloody business ever. So whatever awful bloody actions Othello commands, Iago says he will do them. And they rise. Othello, I greet thy love. So he welcomes Iago's love and loyalty, not with vain thanks, but with acceptance bounteous. So he feels incredibly grateful to Iago. He says, within these 3 days, let me hear thee say that Cassio's not alive. So this is what he asks Iago to do for him, to murder Cassio. My friend is dead, Iago says, speaking of it as though it has already taken place. 'Tis done at your request, but let her live. And this is really interesting, because Iago seems to have absolutely no conscience and to be a completely amoral character, but he suggests that Othello's revenge should not be taken upon Desdemona, and we might wonder why this is. Iago has spoken about Desdemona previously and said that he loves her too, not out of absolute lust, and he talks about being evened with Othello, wife for wife. And perhaps this plays a part in his suggesting that Othello doesn't kill Desdemona. Perhaps, in fact, he is suggesting that, you know, one of the reasons that Desdemona shouldn't be killed is because he loves her too. Perhaps this is something we might infer. In any case, it's left ambiguous. Othello denies this. And he echoes here the villain in like a Jacobean revenge tragedy, a little AO4 point. You might compare the style here. When Othello says, damn her, lewd minx, oh damn her, damn her. So he condemns Desdemona to hell. This is the virtuous, the innocent, the beautiful and lovely Desdemona, the woman that he utterly loved and adored. He now considers a way in which he can kill her. Come, he says, go with me apart, so come aside with me. I will withdraw to furnish me with some swift means of death for the fair devil. I will plot a way of killing Desdemona. Now art thou my lieutenant. So this fulfills Iago's wish. This is what he wanted. This was the reason for his jealousy in the beginning of the play, and the reason that he planned to get revenge on Othello in the first place. He now has everything that he wanted. But the plan isn't going to end there. He's set in place, set in position these wheels that are now in motion, and they cannot be stopped. Iago is set upon this mission to exact revenge for a crime that hasn't been committed. Look at the juxtaposition there on the words fair devil to describe Desdemona, fair suggesting beauty and purity, devil suggesting wickedness and sin. And this speaks to that idea of appearances contrasting with reality here. Desdemona, in Iago's perspective, appears beautiful but is in fact deceitful and secretly is villainous, wicked, adulterous. But at the same time, we know that this is a misconception. Things are, in fact, as they appear. Desdemona is as innocent as she looks. And these last lines, I am your own forever, we can see that Iago is faithfully pledging himself to Iago. Iago is promising his loyalty to Othello, and Othello is now closer to Iago than to his own wife. Okay, a really, really long video, that one. I hope that that's been useful to you in getting to grips with Act 3, Scene 3, and we will continue next time looking at Scene 4. All right, thanks for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.